Hey Jess,
Hey Raina, how are you?
good. Jess, it's so fabulous to catch up with you. I think over the years, having worked with Jessica, it's she's just so passionate about the recruitment and retention space. I can share a lot about Jess and her background, but I'll let her do the honors of introducing her background to you. Jessica is a dear friend, but also a real expert in the space. And it's always been a joy, and she's worked with us on numerous assignments. She's been a client, she's been a friend and advisor, so it's always a pleasure catching up with like-minded individuals like Jessica. So Jessica, if you just want to share a little bit about your background, what you're currently doing in your role, and a little bit about uh, the challenges you're facing as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I really am so excited to be on the podcast. I think it's so important to build networks and to share messages, and so that best practice and what works is shared across industries and we don't keep things for ourselves. So I've been in HR for a really long time, and longer than I care to share because it'll give away my age. Um, but I have been in HR for a really long time, more than a decade, and I love working in the HR space because we have a real opportunity to have such profound impact both on individuals but also the business at large. So it's such a great, it is a really great space to be in. I wear many hats. So I have a full-time job where I am a head of people and culture and look after strategic HR as well as that more operational side of things. But I also have a career and performance coaching business outside of that, where I work really closely with individuals to support them on their journey through taking control and boldly navigating their own career, as opposed to falling into different things that happen along the way. So really taking charge. I love working with individuals. I love working with teams as well, but I love working with passionate women who are really excited and really keen to take that next step in their career, but have some things that hold them back, which we all know we all do. Have those secret barriers inside our mind. So working with individuals to unlock that and help them step into their own greatness, whatever that looks like. And I do the same thing in my day-to-day job, working with individuals and teams and the organization at large as well. So I think I can bring a nice, broad, and a two-sided approach to it, because I know what recruiters and what hiring managers are looking for, but then I get to work with the individuals as well. So yeah, it's a bit about me.
Awesome. I think, Jess, I love the fact that you've managed to really extend yourself, not just in a corporate function, but you're working in that whole space that you're really passionate about, really extending your knowledge to that whole one-on-one coaching piece. I think that's highly beneficial. It helps you constantly keep investing in yourself and learning, because you need that in your role, and helps you really add value to not just a corporate business that you're working with, but individuals and leadership teams and so forth. So I think that's a really great kind of arm of the business that you're interested in, which I'm always passionate about, which is working with people. But I mean, this podcast series is all around recruitment and retention and engagement, and I know that's a space that you've always been passionate about, right?
Yeah.
And in the past, we've crossed paths where you worked with sales functions and outbound sales functions, where the turnover in those sales teams are high, right? And I don't think that problem has ever been fixed, because no matter which business I work with across industry sectors, the highest turnover is always in that outbound sales function. And it is that spot of between the $65,000 mark to the $80,000 mark salary, where the candidates keep churning, right?
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
and I just thought, it's something that we all know, but we don't openly talk about. Businesses know. When you look at your your retention stats, for example, and you can see from a graphs perspective, and where exactly the biggest turnover is, and you're always drawn to, okay, what can we be doing? So if you could just share a little bit about your experiences in that space, what you've done in the past, so I think that would be really valuable.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question. The question of retention in sales team, you're right. It's not something that anyone's ever solved. I think, I know even me personally, there's an element where we've put it in the too hard basket for a really long time. And that there have always been bigger fires and bigger problems to focus on at that particular time. I think there's a real underestimation. I'm not sure if that's a word, but we're gonna roll with it, as to how difficult that role actually is, right? So I think there's this idea that, oh, well, it's sales, it's easy, you've just got to pick the phone up, you've just got to keep going. I think there's this misconception that it's actually an easy job, and it's not. And I think we need to be really clear that it's not an easy job. It's not a job that is probably sustainable for a really long term, especially at that salary point that you sort of mentioned. It's hard work, right? And sometimes it can be hard work. There's not a lot of return on the hard work sometimes. It is, people can get cranky at you, they can get aggressive, they can get really personal, and you can take that personally as well. So I think it's a hard job, and how you balance that will depend on a business by business perspective. Making sure that you're talking around, and some of the impacts that we've had is it's actually also around the quality of the sale, not just the quantity. So making sure that it's this balance between quantity and quality. So making sure that you're making sales that stick. Yeah. And focusing on those aspects as well. There's that age-old saying, people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. There's definitely a huge aspect of the role that the sales leader and the day-to-day operation managers have in there, within the organization. But I think by and large, and where I've seen things make huge shifts, is making sure that the sales function is actually integrated into the organization. And what I mean by that is, I mean making sure that they're not just a sales function, that they're a bigger part of the organization. So they're included a little bit in terms of the research and development. They're valued for the expertise that they have. They're not just people that are picking up the phone and trying to close deals and make sales. And the bonus that you have with that is they know more about the product. They know more about what it is that they're selling. They're included more in that whole development journey, that whole process of the sales piece. And the product knowledge allows them to have a more fulfilling job. And it moves away from picking up the phone and just trying to make sales and reading off scripts and those sorts of things, to that connection piece, and that, making sure that it is the right sell at the right time for the right individual. So that's been some really big things for us, is making sure that they are integrated through that whole process. And it's not just they're past the hot potato at the end of the process and told to sell it, if that makes sense. And that is what can happen sometimes in heavy sales roles and heavy sales businesses. They can just sort of be past the product at the end, but actually making sure that they're integrated as part of the business, and that they're seen to be an important part of the business. And it can change the language, making sure you change the language around sales. It's not actually just the sales team's responsibility for closing sales, if that makes sense. Everyone's got an ownership in the numbers. from the CEO, from the executive team to the salespeople on the ground, everybody actually has ownership in terms of the numbers. It's not just the sales team's responsibility to get the runs on the board. Yes, that is part of their function, and that's what they contribute to the process, but actually it's everybody making sure that you've got a great product, making sure that your after sales piece is great, and that your word of mouth is great, making sure that your marketing's on point. Everybody actually has a piece of the puzzle, and that, I think, has been the biggest shift in terms of those sales teams, and that retention piece is making sure that they feel part of it.
No, that's excellent. I think, can you share a little bit about, the whole progression path? Because I think if they don't really see, because this is where the whole retention piece comes in. And I know that in your previous roles, having worked with you, you had, some really great progression path plans and pathways for the sales individual that comes in, because they need to see some, growth, and the leaders. It's the leaders that really make the sales team. So if you could just share a little bit about what you've implemented in the past.
Yeah, so having a really clear progression piece, I think, is beneficial. You don't want to create something that you're tied to, but one of the personality types, I guess, or those personality attributes that salespeople tend to have is being quite competitive and, very KPI focused and very clear around what those metrics are. So actually detailing what those are. What does good look great? What does great look like? What does good look like? What are those key things that you need to be constantly hitting and moving on to move on to the next step? So I think, making sure that you've got really clear metrics in terms of their conversion rates, their KPIs, their sales KPIs, and their quality as well. So it's not just around who can sell the most all the time, but it's actually what sales close, what people come back, return business, those sorts of things. And having a staged approach for your organization. So I think we had something like, I think it was 3 stages, and it was, your entry level, where your base was relatively low. If you could hit certain metrics for 3 months continuous, so it wasn't just a flash in the pan, you did it once, you moved up. We had to be able to demonstrate that there was some longevity in terms of sales skills and attitude and aptitude. So making sure that if you had 3 months, you could then move up to the next tier, I suppose, is the best one, which I think was then like senior sales consultant or something along those lines. And you then had another lot of KPIs and another lot of metrics to be able to continue to hit. And you had a bit of a salary increase, your commissions kind of, went up a little bit, your earning capacity went up. And the same thing again, you could then move up. We sort of had 3 tiers because it worked on an assumption that it was 2 months to settle into the role, was sort of a month of training, a month to get your feet under the desk. Your first 3 months, you could then move up to the next thing once you were out on your own, the next 3 months and the next 3 months. So it worked on sort of that first 12 months. The expectation was that you would have around that 12 to 18 months that you would have moved into the top sort of piece. There was no automatic people management responsibility, to be really clear. I'm super passionate. It's my other piece that I'm super passionate about is, and Raina, you would have seen this from your days in HR as well, where people are given leadership responsibilities because they've been there the longest or they've got the technical skills, but they have zero personality. It just causes more headaches for HR in the end.
Creating great leaders. I think that's stepping into that whole leadership piece. I think that's great, because that happens in sales all the time. Oh, you've been in the role for so long, just, now you can take on a team, but they may not necessarily want to lead the team. So they're probably more concerned about their own numbers. So it's about really identifying that. I think it's such a big piece. You nailed and I think we all know that as people and culture leaders I know that, but I think we forget, because that's the easiest thing to do. And you're like, oh, he knows it all. He can train everybody, but does he really want to?
But I think this is the problem, right? This is part of the problem with the conversation that we have. I know specifically in Australia, this is part of the problem with the conversation that we have around talking about career progression. It's this career progression is managing people. Like if you think about it, if you talk about graduates and you say, you know, what's the ultimate goal? And they talk about things, it's like, oh, I know I've made it when I've got a team to manage and I've got this and I've got that. And that's actually not the case. That's just not the case. And it's what we've got to stop talking. We have to stop talking about it because not everybody has leadership capabilities.
No.
And that's not a bad thing. It takes everybody in an organization to be part of the organization. Not everybody is made to be a people leader.
Yep.
And so it's being really clear around that. None of our progressions from a sales perspective had people leadership responsibilities in it. That was a separate track for us. That was a separate pathways. And it was something that we would see people, we would see their abilities, we would see those leadership glimmers, and then they would go on a separate sort of conversation with us around what their career progression looks like.
Yeah. And I think that's such a, it's a big piece, right? Because I think the whole mindset, it's like, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up? Oh, I want to be a doctor. I want to be a manager. I want to be a leader. So it's such a, but technically, I think there's a lot of lone wolves that make it and are particularly very successful. And it's just that whole self-awareness piece that not everyone's born to be a people leader, because it does take a lot of commitment, and you've got to know how to work with people, different types of people, and get the best out of them. So not everyone's got it. So I think that's.
And you know what? I think it's a really easy cookie cutter approach to career progression, right? Career progression is as much around you being happy in your role and you being fulfilled in what it is that you're doing as it is to the impact that you're having with everybody else. I know lots of really successful people that have never managed a person a day in their life because they know that that's not their space. That's not what gives them joy when it comes to work. It actually is a frustration for them, as opposed to something that gives them the joy and excitement, right? And so I think we need to start changing that narrative of the conversation around career progression is what gives you joy, and how can you make a living out of that the best way that you can. It's not around squashing yourself into a role that doesn't fit your personality or your style or what it is that you want to achieve.
Exactly. And you've got to, I think the best job satisfaction comes from when you like what you do, right? But if you find people leadership draining, and that can happen, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, but there are leaders that do it really well with setting strategy and being quite hands-off. So it really depends what the business needs and what sort of, what sort of leadership sort of pathway you've chosen, and how you drive and motivate and inspire. So there's so many different things to look at, but that's a whole different leadership conversation we can have. We can go down different rabbit holes. But I thought you spoke a lot about retention. Now, I mean, if you could talk through, I know you're really big about the recruitment process, right?
Yeah.
And I think you've seen a lot of gaps in the past. You've implemented a lot of things. I know your current role, at JMC at the moment, you're kind of you're looking at the business from a holistic perspective, looking at ways that you can drive recruitment and do it right, because it is about the business making the right hire, and it is about going through a process. So because I mean, once you made that hire, it's that investment from your end. So I know a lot of businesses are all about, they don't really have a process in recruitment, right? I've just met someone, I think they can do the job, I'm going to hire them, but there's no real 3-step process. There's no proper references. It's just not done, and it's just like, it's bums on seats, and it's up until today I see that happening. Yeah. And I know you've come in and you have those as challenges in the past as well, and go in there and fix that. So tell us a little bit about recruitment and how important you believe recruitment is, not just in the sales function, but across functions?
Yeah, so look, I think recruitment, there's two parts to it, right? Recruitment is your first opportunity to show your candidates what your business is about. So and I always, whenever I'm doing any sort of interviews, I always sort of say, this is as an opportunity as much for you to get to know us as a business as it is for us to get to know you as a candidate. And I think we need to start seeing the process that's integral, is making sure we see that process from, that two-sided approach, and making sure that we're putting our best foot forward at the same time. There's lots of people that talk around hire for culture, and worry about skill set later. Or there's the piece around, I think it's Gary Vee talks around, and I know Kerwin Ray talks around hire slowly, fire fast, all of these different pieces, right? And it's a big piece for an organization. You make a wrong decision from a recruitment perspective, it can have detrimental effects across the organization, because everybody is working so collaboratively now. I think for me, it's around working with the business to understand what the pain points are in terms of recruitment. Sometimes it can be a really slow process. Other times it can be too quick and people don't feel like they've had the opportunity to make the decisions. One thing is making sure that actually each candidate is marked on the same scorecard. If you've got a role, you've got to have what that scorecard looks like, and making sure that each candidate is marked on the same piece. I'm not a huge fan of CVs and resumes, because I feel I've been doing this for a really long time, and my CV, I don't think properly conveys what it is that I can do, because you're trying to squash so much in a really short space of time. And so I think as hiring managers, we also need to read between the lines and see potential in people, and to see those transferable skills. And so making sure that you've got some sort of touch point. You can't respond to every single applicant, right? Because you can put things out there and get 300 applicants. You can't respond to all of them. But making sure that you do have those face-to-face conversations and you do have those touch points, I think, is so, so, so incredibly important. In terms of process, it's around working with the business, but more so than that, it's actually around working with the hiring manager. What is important to you? Is it more a cultural fit for you that's more important, and we need to really focus on that? Is it more of a skill set piece, and we need to put some assessments in there to be testing what it is that people can do? And then from a reference perspective, I always use the reference opportunity as a space to see how the potential candidate's going to thrive, not necessarily a fact-finding mission. Because it'd be very rare for someone to put forward a referee that's going to give them a bad reference. I think in the 12, 15 years that I've been doing this, I think I've only ever had one person once not be a positive reference, right? As a candidate, would be putting my best foot forward. I'm going to have briefed the person. I'm going to tell them what they need to say. I'm going to tell them about the role. So you're not necessarily going to find out a negative reference.
Yes. 100%.
But what I like to use it for is to make sure that we're setting them up for success. So asking questions around what kind of working environment does this person thrive in? This role is is predominantly in the office or predominantly remote. How do you think they're going to cope with those things? What advice would you be giving to a new manager in terms of how to get the best out of this person? What are those development areas that you would be suggesting that we would focus on to help the candidate's growth? So using it more as a way to make sure that you're setting somebody up for success, as opposed to checking that they and look, naturally you check those sorts of pieces in that process, but the main takeaway for us, and main takeaway for me, is actually setting that person up for success. How can we do that from a reference perspective and get that, that observation piece around it, not just this is what I need. and validating piece. So I think it's a really, recruitment is it can be a hard slog, and and like I said, Gary Vee and all of those people talk about this hire slow, recruit fast, fire fast, which can be a massive challenge, right? From a people and culture perspective, you put all this time and effort into keeping the candidates warm and keeping them
engaged.
onboarding them and doing all of this sort of stuff. And okay, you can dot all your I's and cross all your T's, but then you can end up being back at square one, and it's not a great experience for them. It's not a great experience for the business either. If you've got people coming in and out, in and out, in and out all the time. So I think it's this balance between making sure you've got a robust process and that you're marking candidates fairly against each other on the scorecard, and you're not just sort of going, oh, well, and marking them differently, that you've put some thought into what the job is, what you need from the job, what skill sets they are, and making sure that you're marking people accordingly against that. And then using those different tools and those different levers within the organization or within the recruitment process that you can. So using those reference checks to be able to set somebody up for success, make sure your onboarding process is really robust.
I think you're so right. I think every hire any business makes is a risk. I mean, and I mean, you're completely right. No one's going to give you a reference contact that's going to give them a bad reference. I mean, you've seen that firsthand in our business. We've implemented psychometric assessments.
Exactly.
And they're only 10 and 15 minutes. But even then, we could get a great response. Someone that spent that 20 minutes of their time to kind of answer those questions. They've been benchmarked against, because that's our IP. We benchmark them against mindset and, other sales professionals in that sort of salary base and so forth, but you still can never get it 100% right? So I think sales hiring is probably the most challenging, but just across the business, you could have that. So I mean, there's only so much people in culture managers like yourself, recruiters like myself can do in terms of from a recruitment perspective. But I think the more engagement and the more behavioral type questions that are relevant to your business that you can have at the interview, I think, and also the hiring managers really getting quite involved with or being very clear about what's worked and what hasn't, is the only way you can kind of work through that. But it's such I don't think there's any crystal ball around this.
I personally find hiring salespeople and recruiting salespeople through that process one of the hardest things of my job that I have to do, because their whole job is to sell, right? Like their whole job is to sell. And so they are so good at selling themselves. And on so many times, there have been so many occasions where, they've sold themselves as Prince Charming and they're the frog. And, it's just like,
I know.
It's so hard.
So I think
it's that challenge.
It's that demographic as well, right? Where it's not the highest paid job. It's not the most flashy job. It can be quite monotonous. They have to be self-motivated. I think when you said I don't look at resumes, and I look beyond that, but actually looking for a high achiever in their resume, have they done anything throughout their career that showcases resilience?
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? So I'll bring and my daughter will probably scream and yell at me immensely if she ever hears this, but I have a 19-year-old and we've just gone through the whole process of, do we go to uni? Do we not go to uni? What's she going to do with her life? And I always look at things and I think, and look, granted, university is not
everyone. Yeah.
I'm fully across that. But actually, when I'm looking at a CV, what I'm looking at is, and what I'm looking for is your ability to commit, it's that resilience piece, your ability to sort of think and to work through pieces and to stick with something. So, and so we're going through that journey at the moment with her, and she's sort of saying, I don't want to go to uni, and I'm saying, but you need to go to uni, you need to do something. Like, it's a bit of a freak out mode in our house at the moment, because for me as a hiring manager, when I look at things like university, I don't necessarily look at what they've studied in, unless it's it's a requirement that they've got a certain level of education in a certain field. But for me, it's around going, okay, well, they can do that. They can commit to those sorts of things. They can get assignments in on time, and they can time manage, and they can read, and they can do group work with other people, and they can do all of these things. They
But
can
don't forget,
retain
there are some of
knowledge.
the most successful people that have never been to university.
Correct.
They pick it up later in life. So I am going to, there's going to be a massive debate here, because I have spoken of some very successful people and they haven't been to university. They then just went off and self-taught and picked up. I mean, they were just self-driven, but you've got to, you've got to wake up at some point and go, like Peter Drucker, like, for example, he only decided, he was just sleeping on the couch at 30, he decided, talked about this ice cream adventure. So just,
Oh, look, hands down. And I think, it's definitely been a mindset shift for me as well, to be able to the next generation, and what university means for them, and what further education means for them. And, I know that education and learning is a big, one of my top priorities. So it's also around that. But I think it's those, you're right, when you're looking at a CV, it's not necessarily just what's written on the page in front of you. It's around looking at what that means about the person and how that can be useful for the role that you're looking at.
No, that's excellent. I think we've covered both arms now, recruitment and retention.
Yes.
I think something that you've always been passionate about with your coaching business is providing senior executives with an understanding of what life beyond redundancy is. But Jess, I know it's something you're really passionate about, and as a coach, is talk and really supporting and helping senior executives through their journey when it comes through when they kind of reach that whole redundancy piece, right? So I think it can come as a real shock, and I think delivering it from your end as a people and culture head can be challenging. You can only imagine what it does to senior executives when they really, all they know is commitment to their job. And I think it's easier with the Gen Ys and the Gen Xs, but when you're talking to the baby boomers, when you're talking to someone who's really committed and they've got such a strong work ethic and all of that, they really don't know anything else. And that's where the whole depression kicks in and all of that sort of stuff. So from I know you've got really high emotional intelligence. I know that you're really passionate about working with people. So if you just want to share a little bit about the whole, I know you've got a lot of content there around what's next.
Yeah.
Life post redundancy. So you just want to share a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I'm sat on both sides of the table, and this is, I think, where the passion has come from. I've sat on the side of the table where I've been making roles redundant and impacting people negatively from their employment perspective, and then I've sat on the other side where I've received it. And I think, for me, in those couple of times, or those two main times when I've received it, I've had a really great experience and I've had a really terrible experience. And I think for me, that's really important, that people have a great experience when they're being made redundant. I know that sounds really weird to sort of say because they're losing their job, but that the experience that they're having whilst a negative thing is happening is as good as it can be for them in that particular time frame. So I think that's really important. From a business point of view, I should say, actually how you exit people from the organization is just as important as how you bring people in and how you retain people, because they're still going to go out to the world and they're still going to talk about all of those great experiences that they've had there, and they're still a potential referral for people coming back to the business. So you want to make sure that how you exit people out of the organization is just as good as how you bring them on board. Redundancies happen. I think it's just a piece that you can do, and you're right, it can be such a shock. For me, there are sort of 3 really key steps that you've got to go through. And the first one is making sure your entitlements are correct. Australia has a super complex industrial relations system. It's not straightforward. Mistakes happen, whether on purpose or accidental. So double checking that you've got the correct entitlements, that the process was correct, all of those sorts of things, I think is the first piece, making sure that you've got it there. If you have an opportunity to ask for an outplacement service, 100% ask for an outplacement service. I think they're really great in terms of, one, they're generally qualified in terms of mental health first aid, and supporting you through that mental side, the mental health side of the process, as well as the other piece. And they give you support in terms of writing your CV, all of those pieces. I think that's sort of the stage 1, which I sort of talk about to be the triage piece.
Can I just stop you there one second? Is that something your coaching business provides as an outplacement service, or you work with coaches that do? Or
so I personally don't necessarily provide outplacement service, that I would work with an organization. Where my sweet spot is where your organization hasn't provided you with outplacement, because outplacement can be quite expensive. I work with individuals, and I actually provide sort of a quasi outplacement service where they don't have, the cost isn't as great. So I'm more cost conscious in terms of the packages that I put together. And so it's not working with corporate, so it's not B2B, it's B2C.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so it's more one-on-one, where you come in and help them with tailoring their resumes, really providing them with that support and insight to what the market's doing and how to approach things and stuff like that.
Correct.
Like a career counselor.
Career coach sort of piece, which is very similar to what a outplacement service will do. It's just that it's generally B2C, so the employer will engage it on your behalf and offer it as a service as part of the redundancy process. So I sort of come in when you don't have that option, and I offer a more tailored B2C service, which is just as good, I might say, but it's less costly than sort of the outplacement service. And a lot of outplacement providers will actually only work on a B2B basis. They won't work on a B2C. So you can't necessarily go and say to an outplacement service, I want to engage you. They would only do it through a work referral, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think most larger organizations would have like an EAPA kind of like support line and all of that sort of, but the smaller businesses don't really have that. So it's just really good to have, career coaches like yourself available that we can refer some really great executives to as well, because it's, it's a service that I think is most needed. And those executives are happy to invest in their mental health and, structure and support to basically guide them through that next step. So what do you think in terms of life post-redundancy, in terms of, kind of advice you're giving or you have given your customers before? If you just want to share a little bit about, I mean, yes, the legalities, yes, but what else?
So the next thing is around getting the narrative straight. Redundancies are, whilst they're scary because you've lost your job, they don't necessarily mean doom and gloom for you in terms of your career progression. And actually some of the evidence suggests that people tend to go on to better jobs after a redundancy. It's not necessarily if you can pitch yourself correctly. So making sure you've got your narrative straight and what's your story. It's really important when you go into your next or your interview and your prospective piece, that you don't do the whole, oh yeah, I was made redundant. Oh yeah, it was so horrible. Oh, my employer was terrible. Oh, they shouldn't have done that. That's not your story. But if that's what you're going in and saying in an interview process, then it is your story. So I think being really clear around what your story is. Yep. And own it. My role with X was unfortunately due to economic times. I was, my role was made redundant and I moved on, but this is what I've achieved. This is what I achieved while I was there. These are all of the great things. This is what I'm looking for. These are the learning experience. So being really clear around what your narrative is, and don't get hung up on the fact that your role was made redundant. Look at things from a holistic perspective, I think is really important. And then the third piece is get back out there. You've got to get back out there. You've got to get back into it. I always say interviewing is a skill that we don't train for all the time. We don't keep on top of. We actually only use it when we desperately need a job or we desperately need out of a job. So we don't keep on top of that skill. So I think, making sure that you're getting out there as quickly as possible and getting back into the market, especially with those executive level roles, they're not going to come around tomorrow. They are a little bit of a slower burn in terms of making the next, getting the next appointment and those sorts of things. So making sure that you're getting out there and it can be really easy to fall into a bit of a slump when you don't have a job, you don't have something to go for, oh ho hum, what am I going to do with myself? So I think it's really important to just start taking steps. It doesn't necessarily have to be the right step. You just have to keep momentum going. You have to keep a bit of structure in your life so that you don't get caught just hanging out and socializing, because it can be really fun. As someone who took some time off between jobs, it was really a hard shift to get back into work, because I had slept in a lot and I had had lots of lunches and caught up with lots of people. And so to get back into the recruitment space, to looking for a job and all of those things was tough, right? So I think making sure that you're keeping things moving forward, but working on what your narrative is, what your key takeaways are, and what it is that you're moving towards is really important, because it removes that negativity and it removes that desperation that you've got. Having that really clear path, having that really clear narrative, it gives you something to sell.
Yeah, I just think from a coach perspective, like when someone at that really strategic level is made redundant, they're a bit lost.
Yeah. And what can happen, and I see this a lot with anyone who's been made redundant as well. What can happen, because it's nothing that you could have done. Generally speaking, it's nothing that you could have done. It's a business economic thing. It's not performance. There's no, I could go back and I could have done this differently, or I could have done that differently. It's very much around those economic, economic business strategy, all of those things. It's very much external in terms of you as an individual. And so people try really hard to claw back and to almost go the complete opposite way and want full control over their life, which is why they can tend to go into this entrepreneurial space, right? And that's where that drive can come from, because they're like, oh, I'm not gonna put myself in a position again where someone can have a hold over me, where someone's can make a decision that completely throws my life into turmoil. I mean, that's the epitome of entrepreneurship, right? Like, you've got zero control over what happens to a point, because you're completely at the throes of the market and all of those things, and you're going to be working in spaces that you've not worked in before, right? So I find it quite amusing. And I think working with people that do that and they say, no, I don't want another job, I want to go out on my own. And then you drill down and they don't have an idea and they don't realize. And working with them, you can find out that it does come back to this control piece, and that it comes back to this, well, I'm afraid that I'm going to go and put my heart and soul into another business. And especially baby boomers that have that huge loyalty piece. I'm going to go and I'm going to sacrifice for my family again, and I'm going to put my heart and soul into somebody else's business, and then they're just going to make a decision and I'm replaced again. or I'm let go again. And so that's kind of what you can find, is that it comes from a point of fear, not necessarily a point of, actually, I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I've always wanted to go out on my own. And now it's just a great opportunity for me to be able to do it. So it's, you know, working with people, you sort of see these different pieces. And I think if, as a person who has been made redundant, and your first instinct is to go, I want to set up my own small business or my own large business or whatever it is, I would really encourage people to speak to a coach first, so that you can understand where that's coming from and whether or not it's a genuine, I see a need, I've got a business idea, this is what I want to do, or if it is a knee-jerk reaction because you've been at the throes of somebody else's decision and you want that control and you want that feeling of security, which you never get from when you're an entrepreneur, right? Like, you don't.
But I also think the speaking to a coach can also give them a level of clarity, right? I mean, I think that's important. And I think, you know, your business, the fact that you understand people, you do a lot of study around mindset and shift and really putting some templates in place where people can journal their thoughts and get that clarity, and you're so organized and you kind of give people that clarity. I think a lot of people out there at that senior level definitely need that. So I think it's great to have someone like you that we can refer. I mean, I've got someone in mind right away that I think I'd be very keen to get your pricing model and all of that, so that we could provide that to individuals in our network that can really benefit from it. But I think, thank you so much, Jess. I really think it's been really great just understanding. I think what you're doing is great, but you kind of working with the corporate space and so forth, but you're trying to still keep that personal passion going. Jess, I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on this podcast today. I know your passion about, you know, all things recruitment and retention. I know you're really big about giving back to people and really guiding them through their career journey. You know, your own little side business and your passion comes through when you launched Be Inspired Coaching, and your passion for working within that creative space at JMC. So I'm really grateful for you taking time out. I know how busy it is for you, and you're juggling not just you know, a full-time role, but being a mom and running your own personal ambitions. So taking time out today has been, you know, it's been a real honor having you, and it's been our pleasure.
Thank you so much. And I look forward to being invited back again sometime to talk more about all things coaching, recruitment, redundancies, and life after them, and all of those things. So it's been wonderful.
Thank you, Jess.
Thanks.